All right, everybody, welcome in. We're happy you're here. Marshall and I are going to give, as you typically would, a minute or two for people to join, and then we will get started. So if you have any questions about ingredients or anything, feel free to put it in the chat anytime. If you'd love to chime in, feel free to come off mute, ask questions. Marshall and I are both very, very handsome, but if you ever want to show your own pretty face on camera,
we could get something going on.
We're happy to have you too. Yeah, and I tried all the stuff.
Done.
I'll just play the music. I think I'm
There he goes. No, it was his.
What'd you say?
Never mind, it was
I can't hear
his.
him.
Hold on a second.
I think he's messing
Oh,
up.
those are cute.
Oh, perfect.
All right. And to one of our guests, I put you on mute briefly just because, especially if you're gathering with a group, that's awesome. But we want to make sure that we don't run too much background.
You're on mute.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining Marshall and myself. I will quickly reiterate. I'll try to keep an eye on the background noise a little bit. Please, if you want to come off mute and talk at any point in time, we'd love to have you. But I'll try to there's a point when we start picking a lot of background noise, I'll go ahead and I'll mute you lovingly. Okay. Very nice. Yeah, and just as a recap again for people who are coming in, if there's any questions you have, hopefully the ingredient sheet made it your way. We'll be here to talk about these the news to everybody. I know Marshall has this opportunity every day in his bar with guests, but the number of people every time I teach a cocktail class, not sometimes, every single time I teach one, somebody gets to learn that vermouth is wine and primarily wine. And also I've got the trippy 2-camera thing going on right here, just so you can see me working as well as mine. Okay, well, you know what? It is 7:03 and that seems like as good a time as any to start. Thank you for being here. My name is Chris. I run a company called Decoding Cocktails. And I started this, kind of fell in love with cocktails in 2010, I like to say. I went to my first real cocktail bar, found it really appealing. And right before the world ended in 2019, I wrote a little program designed to teach my friends how to make drinks. And yeah, kind of ballooned into a thing. So here I am. One of the fun things I've done in the course of this business is I've started a podcast, and it was gave me a chance to meet this lovely gentleman right here, Marshall Minaya. I'm in the middle of the country in St. Louis. Marshall's well, I guess you're always
Minimize yourself with the.
I guess you're always a Pennsylvanian at heart, but Marshall's from what's going on here? Hold on 1 second. Sorry. All right, there we go. Okay. Anyways, so Marshall runs a bar program in Manhattan. Marshall, tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Yeah, I run 2 beverage programs in New York City. Valerie is a gin-focused cocktail bar. We have over 62 gins at the moment and 14 different artisanal tonics. We have about 15 fortified wines behind the bar that we use all the time. As well as in October, we opened up a new concept in our basement called Madame George. That's like a New York City themed, more of like a speakeasy vibe style of bar. But yeah, Chris and I met during a podcast and then hung out at Tails for 5 days and went to a lot of classes and talked spirits for a week straight.
That's right. And yeah, for those that don't know, Tales of the Cocktail is a 5-day long. Sorry, I'm killing this second camera. I think it was interfering with our feed here a little bit. So yeah, so Marshall and I were at a 5-day cocktail event down in in New Orleans and had a great time there. And so, but one of the things I remembered when I had the idea to talk about aromatized wines as a category, and we'll kind of begin to break this all down, is I remember when Marshall and I chatted, him really saying, hey, anytime I feel like I can have a conversation about this with people, I feel like we're doing our job. And so, yeah, so what we're going to do right now to kind of, get everybody kind of comfortable and whatnot is we wanted to start by making a little simple spritz style cocktail. And because this is a way where one of the things we want to get into today a little bit, and Marshall, feel free to jump in here, is, we see these vermouths and so immediately we're thinking about martinis and Manhattans, but it's the idea that sometimes these are meant to be enjoyed just for the sake of being enjoyed. So Marshall, what do you have to add on that there?
I think what we kind of forget about is they were originally, distilled to be enjoyed on their own. It wasn't so much later that kind of started mixing the ingredients came together, but I have a bottle of Carpano here, Antica formula, 1700 style of fortified wine. The family holds the secret recipe dear to their chest, and they only release like a few ingredients, like wormwood, saffron. Chamomile is in Fernet very heavily, who also produces Antica. So we know that there's gonna be chamomile in here. Like I said, vanilla notes and wormwood. But this was the original cocktail already made in a glass, over 20 different botanicals in here, just meant to be sipped. It wasn't until a little bit later that then like the Milano Torino of just mixing the Campari and vermouth together would start like crafting that style of cocktail.
Yeah, and so I think Marshall said it there, and just to make sure it's reiterated, this in a way, so this really is a cocktail in a bottle. And so in terms of, maybe you come here to talk about making cocktails, but vermouth in a way is this wine base that is fortified and has various aromatics added to it. And so it's a way that you're kind of having a cocktail on its own right. So, a cocktail that, a lot of people have probably heard of before, maybe you have tried many types of them, but the Aperol Spritz is a drink that we tend to know. But a Spritz is really kind of a style of just adding a nice measure of carbonation, typically to a fortified wine or a bitter like that. And so this is a great way to kind of enjoy a summer afternoon. It's a great way something to enjoy when cooking. And so, Marshall, when you're building a basic vermouth spritz, do you have any rough ratios that you tend to recommend at all?
Well, I think we know with the Aperol Spritz, the recipe that used to be printed on the bottle even was always 3-2-1. So 3 parts Prosecco, 2 parts Aperol, 1 part soda. When you're doing a vermouth spritz, you can pair that up a little bit. I would do like 3 ounces of the vermouth with 2 ounces of sparkling wine if you'd like, or you could just do straight seltzer as well.
And so, yeah, so you would kind of be doing, and obviously a lot of this, Marshall, is like I said, when you come back, this is like, seasoning to taste, right? It's like, do it when you think it tastes good. But so would you kind of think roughly 3 parts vermouth, 2 parts, so 3 ounces vermouth, 2 ounces seltzer would kind of be where you might start right there?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So what I'm going to do for Marshall's been working hard, so he's going to walk you through a couple other cocktails. If you ever looked up and realized you're in a tonic water at home or club soda at home, that's him. He's human. We forgive him. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start. I'm going to kind of fill up whatever glass. A lot of times a spritz might come in like a highball style glass. Sometimes it'll be served in a big tulip or whatnot. I'm going to go ahead and kind of just add ice to my glass right here. And then you can kind of get into various process, but one of the few things I always like to hold that a home bartender should definitely have, and the OXO jiggers are great, but you should have something you're comfortable measuring with. Doesn't matter what it is. And so, yeah, so I think you can use Japanese style jigger like Marshall has there. The bottom line is something you're comfortable with handling in terms of the sizing is what's most important. So just because we're here, we're having fun, I'll go ahead and I'm going to I'm going to go ahead and measure everything out right here. So I'm going to measure out 2 ounces of my soda. And then from here, it's grab whatever vermouth you have on hand. I just picked up this Spanish vermouth called Acha the other day. You really know you're in weird company when you like trying to flex on your friends by buying strange vermouths. But so I'll go ahead and just give this a nice, pour those in here. All right, now, since you can't see that, go ahead and hold it up. And from here, if you want, you can always go ahead to integrate it. Go ahead and give it a little brief stir like so. Want to make sure that carbonation's in there. Marshall, thoughts on questions?
Beautiful. Maybe a lemon twist, maybe an orange twist, whatever you've got. But yeah, really just kind of whatever vermouth you have on hand. Chris pulled it dry. So it's going to be obviously a bit more drier, a bit more botanical forward. So like a lemon twist like that will help bring out those botanicals.
Exactly. We'll want to show to make sure we tell you guys everything we want to know. Marshall, one of the things, had an interloper here. I think I see Justin's on. We got a problem. Everybody, it's about to get haywire. But anyways, so Marshall, one of the things we'll talk about today is the different styles of vermouth and other aromatized wines. Sometimes you might see that some call for a club soda and some call for tonic water. I don't know if that's the right place to start, but do you have any general thoughts on when you should reach for one versus the other? Or is this going to be us talking about other styles of aromatic wines outside of vermouths themselves?
That one's going to be, I think, a bit more preference as well. Tonic, gets its bitterness from the cinchona bark. And I think if you're working with a more bitter style of vermouth, like we'll talk about in a little bit, when you have a fortified wine like Cap's Corpse Quina Quina, that's going to be a bit more gentian forward. Then bitter on bitter isn't for everybody. So then doing like a soda water in that place would definitely be recommended to start. But if you're a tonic person, I mean, pour tonic, like I like drinking Campari tonic or Susan tonic. But I've molded my palate to be much more bitter focused.
Marshall has scalded most of his taste buds off, so he can endure pretty much anything. Yeah, so real quick, so we're here tonight to talk about fortified wines and aromatic wines. So why do these things exist? Well, the first thing is that from a storage standpoint, so fortifying wine has existed for a long time, but it got commercialized big ways. So for the beer fans in the room, think a little bit about, we have the IPA style beer because by bittering the beer more, the English found that it's transported better on the ocean. When they were shipping wine as well, they found this was a problem. And so they started adding brandy. So we're fortifying it with kind of a very neutral flavored grape brandy most of the time. And bumping the proofing kind of stops the fermentation and helps better protect the wine against kind of aging and going bad. So vermouth is a wine that has been fortified and then typically had various aromatics put into it. So there's two reasons behind, as I've dug into the history, and history is, very subjective, and then I'll take a breath. So one, you can look at various herbs and roots being infused in wine all the way back to like Hippocrates, however you say his name, famous Greek guy. If you've ever heard the term, Mary Poppins, a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. So many herbs, roots, other things like this have medicinal qualities. And so when we put it into alcohol, especially something like a wine that has sugar in it, it was easier for people to ingest those things. It also helps if wine has gone bad. Infusing these aromatics also helps to kind of cover up imperfections. Probably less of a problem that we're facing today, but these are reasons why, when we've been looking at these things happening for a couple hundred years, why we've got that there. And so, well, the various herbs and roots that can go into some of these things, and Marshall, run with this wherever you want. But yeah, it's going to vary based on the dry versus sweet vermouth. Sometimes might really show us what they're using to flavor.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. I mean, the thing that I think that we don't realize when we have that sweet vermouth sitting right next to a blanc vermouth is they're all white wine based. And it does depend on the kind of botanicals of the region. A lot of the times is what they'll flex harder into that vermouth. Like I have a bottle of dry from Method. Method vermouth is made in New York with New York botanicals. Obviously some imported, but it's going to have a bit more of those like upstate, woodier, earthier types of botanicals in there. A little more funk to it than kind of like a Dolan or Rotin. That is like your common vermouth, but that sitting on the rocks is a nice pour.
Mhm. So one of the things to stress first, Marshall, I think like you're saying is like, depending on the region it comes from, a little bit influences what's used, what the grape base is, et cetera. But is there a way, like at the highest level for people, when we're talking about a dry versus a blanc or a blanco, bianco. So it's all these different terms for white versus a sweet, a rojo. Is there a way that at the highest level, you can kind of help guide people through how to think about these three in terms of the profiles they might present?
Yeah, I think most of your blancs and sweet vermouths are going to have a bit more sugar content to them. And those are the ones that we tend to typically pair with like your darker spirits when you have a sweet vermouth, kind of like your bourbons and your ryes and your barrel aged spirits. And go back to like the Martinez would have been made with Geneva, which is nice and malty and has a bit more of that oak flavor to it. So you think sweet vermouth with those types of spirits. And when the martini then came about, then that's when kind of dry vermouth and cocktails, I think, really started like riffing off of that.
For those that don't know, and you could look this up, so the martini's predecessor is called the Martinez cocktail. And so, yeah, would have either had like this Geneva, pardon me, or an Old Tom gin, but is kind of a style of a martini that is arguably the predecessor. And I happen to look this up at one point. There's a town in California that's just outside of Oakland, where it's from. And I forget if it's the town of Martinez or not, but anyways, that's where it's. So the Martinez is from Oakland, is my understanding. So there you go.
I might have to debate that one.
Okay. I swear I looked it up. All right, anyway, it doesn't matter.
We'll look it up.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so Marshall, just let me know that that's a
We'll find the town. We'll find the town.
Okay. People out there listening, we're obviously very interesting folk. Any questions so far that you guys have that would be top of mind right now? Check on our. So while I put that out there in terms of questions, you guys might have. Well, you know what? I'm still sharing my screen. All right. Well, so vermouth. I'm sure you guys were all ready for this and excited. So to get an etymology lesson. So the word vermouth tracks to the German word of Wermut, which means wormwood. So this was a German style wine that had wormwood put into it. So wormwood is that thing where you're like, is that the absinthe thing? It is that thing. So whether it is a cinchona, which is the bark that we use to make quinine, gentian, which anchors one of Marshall's favorite things, Suze, or wormwood, there's this broad category of aromatic wines that have typically bittering agents like a wormwood, like a cinchona, or gentian in them. And this kind of settles as the base for imparting some of the basic bitterness that happens there. And wherever you want to get into the medicinal aspect of this or not, the reality is that some of the mild bitter qualities of a vermouth or a quinquina kind of also helps kind of wake up the digestion a little bit, but also imparts varying degrees of bitterness. And so, but that's the root of the word wormwood comes from vermouth right there. Let's see anything on our questions here.
US based vermouths.
Yeah. Do you have any recommendations on that? Or do you tend to, you obviously had your method right there. Are there
Yeah, method I recommend. That one I'm not sure on their like nationwide distribution. There's another one called Little City that is also made in New York, and that one is I think more. It is a bit more Spanish style. I think the method, like their sweet vermouth is heavy sarsaparilla notes. So it's more of like a Torino, like a Cochi Torino, if you had to compare, as opposed to like a Dolan or a Vermouth Rotin. But I'd have to look up kind of some US based vermouths. There's not a lot of them that kind of get out there
Sure.
outside of like their city.
So how about this question, Marshall? On our, okay, yeah, we can ask the Lillet question here. Lillet, I forget. Anyways, so when it comes to sweet vermouth as a spectrum, again, bunch of family recipes, so various things are going to go in. But if we're thinking about Antica that you might have right there, this Foro right here that's come out, I find is very closely mimicking Cochi di Torino. You've got like a Punta Mess, but if you were Marshall, is there a way that you could draw a little bit of a, I don't know if there's a one-way spectrum, but like if for people looking at this, like the recipe calls for Carpano, I only have Cochi. Is there a way you could help people think about a spectrum of sweet vermouth a little bit?
I think, I think the spectrum is a wide range. I think when I first started bartending, it was just like there's sweet vermouth and like that's it. And it is until kind of you get into tasting each one and realizing how different the botanical build is, how different they all are. I think some are interchangeable, but I think if the recipe calls for Carpano, you should use Carpano. Like for a hanky panky, when you're combining that London Dry with Carpano and Fernet Branca, you need the viscosity, you need the vanilla tones, you need kind of that extra something that the Carpano has that like a Dolan can't, like a Chambray can't keep up with.
Sure. Yeah, and so like this is where next time you guys are at Valerie, or you should go right now. Well, not right now, Marshall's not there. But going to a bar and asking for a flight, if they have multiples, asking for a flight of vermouth, for example, the idea to kind of be able to sit down an A/B comparison, like the difference, understand like, yeah, the Carpano is very thick on the palate. And so it really helps it better. Some people have even heard argue they feel like it better stands up to Campari because Campari can be such a bully. But yeah, so this is where you get to kind of experiment. But yeah, like tasting Dolan Sweet or Rouge, whatever you want to call it, next to Carpano, it's just, they are very different, even though they're both sweet vermouths, right?
Very different. And Punta Mess even also created by the Fernet family and Carpano, is just going to be more bitter. It's going to be the Carpano base with heavier bitters in it. So it's going to have a little bit more legs to it, not quite as viscous, but also kind of specific for a cocktail that it's called for.
Sure. Do you want to take a run at that? There's a Lillet question that came in, then we'll work on our second thing right there. So would something like Lillet fall into the vermouth family? So
yes, well, Lillet is going to be a aromatized wine, kind of like the broader category of what we're talking about. The original, that Quina Lillet, that was the original call for like the James Bond Vesper, was originally produced with heavier wormwood in it. The Lillet Blanc that's on the shelves now pulled back a little bit on that wormwood. But yeah, it's still in that fortified wine category. If you had to pigeonhole to it to what we're talking about, like a Blanc, a dry, or a sweet, it would be closer to that Blanc, but it's going to have a little bit more to it.
And Marshall, real quick for like the categories. So we've got vermouth over here where wormwood is the primary thing. Is Lillet, is that a quinquina? Is that right? Or is it not?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Oops.
But I could be wrong on that one. The original Quina Lillet was definitely heavier into that gentian and wormwood. But the recipe that we've all had is a bit more mild. So I'm not sure if it falls into that Kina, but I would definitely have to double check the bottle.
So we wanted to do maybe a little discussion about martinis and Manhattans right now. Marshall, I've got my stuff. I'll turn it over to you from here, whichever way you want to, kind of take people through it from here. I'm right here.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, do you want to start with a martini or
What?
or is it either or?
It's certainly either or. You're welcome to make both or one. I think, part of it for me, if this resonates with how you're comfortable teaching it, is that these are, drinks that look nothing alike, that are built in a very similar fashion. So even if we just want to talk about it in terms of I'm making this one, but here's how that would translate to being one or the other. Yeah.
Sure.
So I think as long as like the people who've got dry vermouth at home understand how to turn out a martini at the same time you do a Manhattan or whatever, it's perfect.
Yeah. We can, I think too, like the original conversation that we even had about vermouths was because of martinis.
Yes.
I think when you're on the perspective of the bartender and someone walks into the bar and they order a martini, obviously, the original specs way back. And if it's a variation of a Martinez, that was Geneva and then gin. As it got drier and drier, it also transitioned from gin to vodka in the 80s, 90s, when everyone kind of dropped gin out. But I was someone that operates a gin program. We want to get vermouth back into the glass. So I think when you're building your martini, your cumulative ounce pour should always be 3 ounces. And then your preference is kind of your preference on how much you like vermouth versus how strong you would like your martini. It kind of dictates where you go from there. I personally drink a 50-50 martini. So it'd be 1.5 ounces of gin to 1.5 ounces of dry vermouth. But for the standard or like the common consumer, a 2.5 to half ratio is more common. That's what we pour at the bar. But I'm gonna make it 2 to 1 right now. If everybody want to join me. So we're gonna start with an ounce of our dry vermouth. And I have about 30 bottles of gin to choose from back here. Today, I think we'll go with
That's the way I run my programs now. I pretty much only traffic in handles now.
just
So,
handles. Very nice. I'm gonna go with Bootleggers
perfect.
from upstate New York. Only 5 botanicals in there. Non-chill filtered, so it's a bit higher proof. Holds up very nice in a martini.
And I think something Marshall said that I always agree with fully is there's a fun cocktail like this in the title. It's called the Astoria, and it's 2 ounces dry vermouth, 1 ounce gin. And so I think, I also, especially using this Acha right here, it's a little bit bolder of a dry vermouth. And so to me, it's a way where you can enjoy a cocktail, but also as Marshall and I like to say, it's like, you can have the 2.5 to half. If you love them, go for it. But for him and me, it's also like, well, after I have this cocktail, I want another one. And when you're playing the 2.5 to half ratio, they're going to catch up very quickly. And it's your call. But yes, that's part of it. So.
And while we're building the martini, just one thing to hope to also guide you all through your better martini build. The goal is to always have your martinis stirred, not shaken. And the idea behind that is just all about texture when we're building a cocktail. If you're shaking a drink, you're adding ice into the tin and you're shaking it, you're going to be aerating the cocktail. Basically, you're going to be packing as many bubbles as you possibly can into the drink. Whereas when you're stirring it, you're going to incorporate the ingredients while diluting the cocktail, chilling it, and then you're gonna have at the end a very like heavy mouthfeel to it. You're gonna have a better texture that's gonna sit on your palate, not dance around, and kind of maintain that.
And I tell people that like Marshall, jump in here, you train people all the time, but like to me, it's like so if you're not used to stirring, the bowl of the spoon always sits on the perimeter of the glass. And it's kind of like you always feel like you're pushing on the perimeter of the glass. So you kind of always feel like, I always feel like I'm applying pressure, like I don't knock the glass over, but like I'm kind of can feel the pressure that I'm pushing on the wall. And in general, Marshall, do you do 20 seconds or so, or how long do you typically stir for?
Yeah, I stir by watching the ice fall and the temperature of the glass, but I'd say, yeah, we could call it 20 seconds. Sounds good.
All right. No more nerd answers, okay? All right.
About the love of the drink, Chris.
Marshall's like, I can feel when the glass is 36.5 degrees. Thank you very much.
It talks to me, and then I stop.
That's right. Something I once read for you guys out there, and so one of the things you can do if you haven't poured out your martini yet is pour it into a whole bunch of glasses and grab an olive, throw it in one. And then we can talk about an olive or lemon, throw it in the other, because this drink is just so naked. So yeah, any thoughts on garnishing a martini at all there, Mr. Minaya?
Garnish, again, preference. I'm usually lemon twist. I understand dirty martinis and the saltiness of the brine and what it adds to the gin. But just personally, I prefer just that fresh citrus zest instead.
Yep.
But again, preference. There's also a Gibson where it's just going to be garnished with a pickled olive instead. And again, if you want that extra kind of vinegar, that saltiness, then that's the style of drink that you like.
Hey, Belle. Hi, pretty girl.
Oh, yeah. Okay, perfect. Got it. But yeah, so and that's the nice part about the martini in terms of one, with a drink that's this boozy and booze forward, you learn the way you like it. But I think it's learning how to like experiment with that and to realize that a garnish for a drink that's this naked, so to speak, is going to really change a lot just by a dash of bitters, garnish, etc. Yeah. So certainly
that is a highly debated conversation too. If you look back to the early 1900s as well,
okay.
Those first martini specs all had orange bitters in them.
Right.
And as they got drier, then it was kind of, the more you would see printed, it was 50-50 whether it had the orange bitters in it or not. But yeah, former bar owner and I used to debate orange bitters and martinis for hours.
Just because I know sometimes, Marshall, that people ask about this. So, because, they see bitters and they see Angostura and they go, okay, I know what that is. But like, so in the vein of this, or if we're going to talk about Martini Manhattan, is there a way that you could summarize what a citrus bitters like an orange is compared to an aromatic? I mean, obviously some of these recipes are very proprietary.
Sure.
Angostura is like very proprietary.
Yeah.
But anyways, do you mind, is there a way you can articulate the difference between those two for folks?
Yeah, I think that the aromatic bitters, like our Angostura, that the yellow cap, oversized paper that everybody knows. Yeah, exactly. Those aromatic bitters are going to have much heavier warming spice notes to them. Botanicals like cinnamon and clove and allspice, as well as they're going to be much richer, like higher molasses content. And then our orange bitters are typically going to be a neutral grain base, kind of like a very high proof vodka, we could say. And then it's going to be a balance between dried and fresh citrus peel. Or depending on which ones you're making, but yeah, orange is going to be more kind of dried citrus, fresh citrus, with the gentian bark, a little bit of cinchona and wormwood. I believe that's it. A little bit of sugar. But Brad Thomas Parsons' book Bitters has a really nice and easy orange bitter recipe in it that you guys could just make at home.
Yeah, get on that. Get on your own bitters game.
Get on your own bitters game.
Let's see real quick. So. Test right there. So for someone, because obviously you think about this very carefully, Marshall, it's like, we have gotten to the point where you can have, magnets that say, if you're reading this, put the vermouth in the fridge right here. So because, make sure we're all on the same page. So vermouth is primarily wine. So the minute you really open a bottle, you should be storing it and refrigerating it. Obviously, Valerie and Madame George Marshall, you guys obviously have a very high expectation of a great caliber cocktail. For someone at home, any thoughts on shelf life, knowing that we don't have to turn out top notch, but we want to have good cocktails at home?
Well, it's funny, actually. I think we'd be better off at our bars not keeping them in the fridge because we go through it so quickly, as opposed to at home. Like, I definitely recommend you keep it in the fridge so that way it will last longer and you don't need to go out and buy like another bottle soon. The alcohol content and of the wine, it will last for a month plus. In the fridge, basically the less oxygen getting into the bottle, the better. If you keep it in the fridge and there's no sunlight coming through your window that could hit it and warm up the spirit and just, So I'd say you have like a month or two before it's really off. As our friend Nikolai says, like, if you need to put it in the fridge, then like you're not drinking it fast enough.
Right. And it's one of the things to think about that, if we really try to look at this more like wine, then we begin to think about, why not just enjoy some like you would typically think about popping a bottle of wine, and some of the vermouths, like, Carpano. Nicola was here, he'd scold me.
Yeah,
Carpano. Trying to get my full gringo accent on here, but yeah, so I think having a little bit of that, especially if you dilute it with the club soda or whatever, is great. And this way you don't maybe feel like you're in a race against, like, oh my God, I'm buying this bottle, I'm in trouble, I have to drink martinis every night. It's like, hey, just having it on its own or with some club soda is a great way, in a way that you can feel like you can enjoy a little bit for several weeks, as opposed to like rush through the thing.
And again, it's supposed to be aperitivo. It's sessionable. They're proofed to have throughout the day, not necessarily. It's very much so the American way to do high octane, high proof spirits and cocktails. And in Italy and Europe, it's for the day. You start with it just after breakfast.
Europeans, they can probably outlast you in a drinking competition because they're mostly drinking lower proof stuff than us, and it's very, very smart. We go hard in the paint and then we go home. So very good. What else? So we want to work through the Manhattan too, do you feel like, or
Sure.
And what other, and let us know, folks, if you got questions at home right there. We can we'll happily.
So Manhattan spec is going to be one of the easiest ones to remember if you know the area code of Manhattan. 212 was the primary area code for the longest time, and that's going to be your recipe build. So it's going to be 2 ounces of your base spirit, traditionally rye whiskey, with 1 ounce of vermouth and 2 dashes of bitters.
Okay. Now, Senor Minaya, so if you've got Carpano, as I understand, if I understand, I've got this Oro, which is more in the Cokie style. Obviously you can just do it to taste. Would you reflexively, if you were building a Manhattan with Carpano versus Cokie, kind of use a different spec or not?
If I was doing a Negroni, I would say yes. Manhattan, I'll keep it with my 212.
Okay, very good.
But I do think that the Carpano is, like we said, it's its own beast, right? It's its own cocktail, like in the bottle already. I don't think that it's an everyday for every cocktail vermouth, but I do think that it's good to have on hand for specific styles.
And for the folks at home, yes, so, Melissa, I'm gonna answer your question one second. So right before then, so just to make sure we're all on the same page regarding dashes of bitters. So especially with the thing like the Angostura bottle, gonna give it a little like that little stabbing, that kind of little, inverted motion right there. We're not necessarily talking 2 drops as much as kind of this like little dabbing motion right here. So Melissa just asked the question. And by the way, because Marshall and I are overachievers, we are actually going to work on a cobbler style cocktail that will be very low proof is kind of our closer. But yeah, so Melissa, sorry, I got to, okay. I was getting direct messages. Oh my God. Okay, so in terms of, I was just asked about adding Campari to this. So yes, that would be a Boulevardier would be the cocktail you're talking about, which is a Negroni riff right there. Marshall, like, do you have a typical Boulevardier spec? Do you do equal parts?
I'm more of a equal parts depending on the vermouth. So
Okay.
I would say like Negroni always 1-1-1. If we're bringing Carpano into conversation, then I would change my recipe to do 1.5 ounces of my base spirit, 3/4 Campari, 3/4 of the Carpano, just because of the botanical build it has of it, because of the viscosity and what it brings. Then I would want more of that base spirit, but I'm usually a 1-1-1 for Boulevardiers as well.
Yes, if you wanted to make a Boulevardier instead, you would just do 1 ounce your whiskey, 1 ounce your Campari, 1 ounce your sweet vermouth. So with that cocktail, again, you'll see that for the most part, it's still 3 ounces like Marshall talked about, but we're just taking away 1 ounce of our base spirit and adding this Italian bitter liqueur, Campari, to the equation.
A little mini Manhattan.
Ooh, okay, perfect. Have you ever, Marshall, Punch, is a subscription where Marshall and I read at night with the lights off, kind of like, ooh, what are we going to talk about now with cocktails? I've seen them talk before about martini highballs. Have you ever experimented with martini highballs with tonic water, or like even like turning a Manhattan into a highball ever with like a club soda? You ever tried any of that stuff?
I haven't, no.
Okay.
But I could see where the appeal is though.
Yeah. So I remember my father once said to me, he said, he's a martini guy. I made him a martini highball. He goes, well, I used to be a martini at 8 p.m. kind of guy. Now I'm a martini at 2 p.m.
At 2 p.m.
Did all this preparation for class, and yet I'm the one who's running around to grab everything. So I always think it's nice, like with your martini or Manhattan, if you've got your cocktail right in front of you, to take a taste certainly before you add the sweetness of your cherry. In class, I often even have people make their Manhattan with just with their whiskey and their vermouth first. And then even though it's not as perfectly blended, I'll have them taste it like that way. And then tasting it with that dash of bitters in there. So you can kind of see how the cocktail changes every time. So I do think sometimes tasting it sequentially is a way that you can understand really what, it's something as minuscule as this cherry or that, that dash of bitters is bringing to the cocktail.
Especially because everyone loves those Luxardo
Yes.
maraschino cherries, and the brandy cherries are covered in a delicious syrup, but it definitely adds sweetness to the cocktail.
Yes, it does. Yeah, as much as I like them, I switched to this Tillin Farms brand because I was like, okay, I can't spend $73 on cherries whenever I need them. So, are there? I meant to ask this. So for someone, it's like there's a martini cocktail called Tuxedo, and I don't want to drill you on the spec right now. I don't know if we talked about this, but so like in terms of, Marshall's right. I'm armed. So there are things in which we can begin to bring other styles of fortified wines into the equation. So I don't know if this is too big of a digression, Marshall, but in terms of like, okay, if you see a recipe calling for dry vermouth, is there a thing to know like, hey, like if you have some dry sherry laying around, try it in its place? Or hey, if you don't have dry vermouth, but you've got a Blanc Quinquina, are there any basic substitution rules you'd have for people? Is there any way to start thinking about it in terms of if they want to play, okay, I'm a Manhattan guy, try this. I'm a Martini gal guy, try this. Like anything like that. Oh, I lost you. Uh-oh.
We're good. We're good. We're good. When I first tasted dry sherry was
Yep.
the Tio Pepe Fino, and I was like tasting it. I tasted another fortified wine that they make called Gonzalez Baez Sherry Vermouth, and the representative I was talking to like said you could utilize this kind of like a like a Carpano, something like that, right? It's heavier cinnamon, heavier warming spices. And then on the other end of the spectrum, he was like, here's the Tio Pepe, that's the dry sherry, like the Fino sherry is the dry sherry on the spectrum. And I was thinking, I could just use this as a dry vermouth, but not the case. It's very, very dry.
Yes.
So I don't think that it's like plug and play, but I do think that you can make really nice cocktails with it. But I wouldn't say that like that would be your pull for like a martini.
And so this could be like splitting hairs then a little bit. So I've got an Oloroso here
Sure.
from Barbadillo right here. So this is kind of folks like in sherry. We could be here all night. So stay tuned for the upcoming Decoding Cocktails interview with Lou Stowhouse. That's lovely. Anyways, so I have before seen like Manhattan builds that can call for like where you could either bring in, like you could always take out a little of your sweet, put in some Oloroso, or even there's obviously the East India Negroni that calls for like their East India sherry. So if you're making a Manhattan, would you ever split build with any sherries if people want to get real crazy out there?
I think you could definitely split with the Oloroso is going to be not quite as dry as an Amontillado, have a heavier like nuttiness to it. So I think that it does work well if you were going to split it. I also think that if you're trying to play sherries into a cocktail, a good start is just building your old fashioned, but remove your sugar, your demerara, your simple, whatever it is that you're using at home, and just use a 1/4 ounce of Pedro Jimenez sherry, which is just going to be heavy fig, like jammy notes. But as like an improved style of old fashioned, I think it's the perfect place to start.
And if there's any whiskey drinkers on the call, like sometimes in your whiskey bottles, you might say it was finished in like a PX cask. That stands for Pedro Jimenez, but this is a very sweet style of sherry. So yeah, that's a place you can start with. Yeah, let us know if there's other questions right now. Anything on? So it looks like things we wanted to do still, Mr. Minaya, was we wanted to talk about the cobbler. We want to take that out for a little ride. Anything else that we haven't covered so far that you wanted to talk about in our show?
Well, I think we didn't. So there is we touched on the Quinquina styles and the burr, but just basically in short, when you see them, if you read them on a menu that like a cocktail writer has written, it's just another style of fortified wine with heavier notes of like wormwood and your gentian root, and it's just going to be a bit more bitter. So like if we're talking about subbing, like if you're building a white Negroni variation, you're going to use like a Lillet Blanc, like we talked about earlier, with Suze and gin. You could remove this, you could cut the Suze back and cut your Lillet back and add in, or even cut your Lillet out and add in a like Blanc vermouth and one of those Blanc Quinquinas. and it makes a really nice, slightly less bitter style of white Negroni variation.
Yeah, so some of it unfortunately is going to be experimenting a little bit, or in your neighborhood. For those in the St. Louis market, going to Intoxicology is a great place where they can kind of guide you. But yeah, go into the right liquor store. But yeah, like another great aromatized wine out there is a Coquille Americano is fantastic, and it kind of has a lovely blend of those. And so yeah, there's times when you could also probably, I would imagine it's a little bit more bitter, but you could probably begin to sub it for like as a Blanc style in some places too. It's really, really well.
And the Coquille Americano is going to be a bit closer to that Quina Lillet that we talked about, like if you were building like a Vesper.
Okay. Okay. Good, good. Yeah. So other little things to kind of think about. There's books by a gal, she's the editor at Punch Magazine, Talia, Baiocchi, sorry, I don't, my Italian's rusty, but she's got a book called Spritz that's really lovely, kind of talking about this style. I haven't read Drinking French by David Leibovitz. Are there any other, Marshall, people want like some hard texts on covering aromatized wines? Obviously, I don't know if there's any books specifically to it, but like I'm trying to think if there's any books.
There is a book one of my bartenders brought in. I believe it's just called Sherry.
Sure.
And it was a thick book just breaking down the process of how sherry is produced in the bodegas is lengthy. And again, we could talk about it forever. Definitely just listen to Chris's upcoming podcast with the Lustau House. They've come to the bar and done trainings before, and they're always excellent. But understanding sherries is going to help you understand your fortified wines as a whole, and understanding the different types, how long they're fermented completely changes the process, as well as their Solera system of aging. And so yeah, I believe it's just called Sherry. And it is fortified wines. Any cocktail book that you would pick up, there's usually a section in there that breaks down like vodka, gin, rum, sugarcane distillates, et cetera, and there's usually one in there breaking down aromatized wines as a whole. So definitely give that a read.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people have the first Death & Co book, the Modern Classic.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
There's a section in there, but yeah, so that could be at least a starting point as a reference as well. So I actually don't have the spec in front of me. Do you remember the build on that? So you guys could have had a mint julep before. You could have heard of a sherry cobbler before. If you haven't had a sherry cobbler before, stop everything you're doing. You need to have them. They're amazing. But we figured also, since many of you might be showing up with, and I don't know that this is going to translate to our dry vermouth people, but if you have a bottle of sweet vermouth on hand, we wanted to try to make what's it called, the vermouth cobbler. And it's something you might doctor a little bit, and especially if, I think in Marshall's early research, he found, hey, if you could have a bottle that is a drier style, you might find, anyways, Marshall, would you be willing to guide us through how to make this cobbler? Right.
Sure. Yeah, and the cobbler started Jerry Thomas's Bartender's Guide in late 1800s. First showcased the cobbler, and then after that, the mint julep was a variation of a sherry cobbler. But basically, you would do like a sherry, like an Amontillado, that's going to be drier, but not the driest. And you would just muddle maybe like 2 or 3 orange wheels with 1/2 ounce of simple syrup, 3 ounces of your sherry, and shake that up and put it over some crushed ice. And it is the summer cocktail. Like, it is a crushable, very refreshing, very light drink. So when we were talking about it last, we were reading about
Lustau. Don't get Lustau.
It's a hard pitch. When we were talking before, and we were literally just saying, like, do people make vermouth cobblers? And we were both unsure, and a very quick Google brought up a recipe for a vermouth cobbler, and I made it at the bar, and it is fantastic.
And I'll put the recipe in the chat too. So this is where, do you mind talking through what we want to have on hand right now?
Sure. Oranges. If you have an orange, I have some tangerines, so I'm going to use that for mine. And then because we're using a sweet vermouth, if you're using a dry, I would say do a bit more simple syrup. Because we're using a sweet vermouth, we're just going to do a 1/4 ounce of our simple, which is like a 1-to-1 ratio of sugar to water. And then we're going to do 3 ounces of our vermouth.
Vermouth cobbler. You saw it here first.
Cobbler, baby.
Unless you look at that link, don't look at that link.
You just want to give that a muddle if you do have your oranges on hand.
And Marshall, did you say kind of like, so if I've got kind of 2 wheels right here, like?
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
Okay, perfect, great. Best part about this drink is I had Marshall make it, so I don't know how to do this yet. So, okay, so. Also nice when you're having a pre-call with like somebody who's on set at a bar and he's like, when I get off this call, I'm gonna make this.
Make it right now. I think I went straight down to Madame George and I just pulled the spec and I said, let's make this, give that a try. And if you have it at home or, if you're at your bar or whatever, garnish with fresh mint for more aromatics. And I mean, cobblers it just says in the original spec is just seasonal fruits. So
Yep.
Whatever tickles your fancy, whatever makes you happy, throw that in there. You have pebble ice at your house?
What's that?
You have pebble ice at your house?
I don't know. I just keep all my ice in here. No. We're fancy, but we're not that fancy.
Right.
You can watch Marshall, he'll know by feel when it's done. But yeah, I find
Right.
a lot, typically about 10 seconds or so. But
When you're doing something, if you have pebble ice, which I don't at home, but if you're shaking to pour over pebble ice, you want to shake a bit harder for a shorter amount of time. So you're not over diluting, but you're
Okay.
still aerating because the pebble ice will melt a little bit quicker.
And so Marshall, are you fine straining this? Are you straining this over ice? Is how you're doing this, guy? Or do you just dumping it out?
I would strain it out. I just kind of like a thing of me. I just don't like guts in my cocktails. So
Yep.
Even mojitos, we double strain. And I just have big blocks left. I'll just do some cracked ice.
Got mint left over from class, so that's cool. So yeah, from here I can fill the glass in with ice a little bit, but yeah, so.
I mean, that's delicious. Honestly, with the Carpano,
Mm.
because
Oh,
like
yeah.
we said, it already is a cocktail on its own. Just that fresh orange, my little tangerine.
Yep.
Really brightened it up.
And I would bet, yeah, it was like to our comment that, sorry, I'm going down the wormhole, guys, but so I'm going to put just a little of this Amontillado in there or whatever, that'll help kind of, or not Amontillado, Oloroso in there. See, kind of, I'm going rogue here right now. You're welcome. So I'm going to ruin this cocktail right now. So we've been at this for almost 1 hour, closing in on it. Any questions from you guys out there? At this point in time, things we didn't make clear. What else would be helpful? Yeah, obviously, think pretty much all of you should have been on our little email thread. So yeah, feel free to reach out to us via email if you have any questions.
I can add to that email too. I do have a recipe for a dry vermouth that you can make at home. Basically, when it comes to like, we have a store here in New York called Kalushkin's. It's basically like heaven if you're going in for as a bartender to try to like work on a new cocktail, but it's a kind of like an Indian spice shop, and it has all the botanicals and like flowers and whatever it is that you might pique your interest. But I'm sure you can find them online either way. But you could make your own vermouth at home with like a Pinot Grigio base or something like that. Trebbiano is a popular grape for vermouths. And adding your own botanicals like some fresh lemon, a little bit of juniper, some coriander, etc., a little bit of gentian or wormwood, and then you can fortify it, like Chris said, with a brandy, or you could do a neutral grain base, or I've actually, at the bar, we fortify our in-house dry vermouth with Fino sherry. So we fortify it with another fortified wine, just to give it that alcohol content, and it dries it out a lot.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, no, thank you everybody for coming tonight. Yeah, I think that's all we got from our end of things. Right?
Sandy, favorite cocktail bar in Spain?
Ooh, well, yeah, that's a whole other
That's a good one. Italy, I could give a few. I was just there.
right. There's a whole controversy up in Spain too. So if you look up 50 best bars online, Barcelona is hot right now. It's hot.
Yeah, there's some controversy with the Schmucks crew.
Yeah, there's a very understated bar group there called Two Schmucks, but the name aside, they've had some turnover, but yeah, so they were, a lot of people were really loving on them. So, yeah, but that's our program for tonight, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.